So the next example, if you want to write in your notes or on a word screen. Let's see. For this particular example, what we're going to do here is we're going to measure, actually go back to the data. I forgot what I created here. What do we got for the columns here?
Depression, family history, anxiety, and September 11th.
So it's the last two columns that matter.
Okay.
So we're going to measure in the last two columns anxiety and where you were on September 11th. So this particular study, I'm measuring anxiety levels. Let's say you're measuring anxiety, if you want to write this in your notes, maybe 5 years after September 11th. Maybe 5 years after September 11th. Five years after September 11th. And we're actually classifying people into three groups. Gotta look at the data. Group number one. Let's say that they were actually in New York City that day. So they were in New York City that day. So group number one was in New York City that day. Group number two. Group number two was not in New York City that day. So let's say they were in, let's say, California. Group number two were people in California. And group number three were Americans, but they were in a foreign country, so they were international. So they were Americans, all the people were Americans, but they were in another country the day of September 11th. And we wanted to measure anxiety levels. So this is anxiety 5 years later. So this study, we'll say, was done not on September 11, 2001, but September 11th, when?
2006.
2006. The question is, the first question is, what kind of analysis would be appropriate here? What kind of analysis would be appropriate here? Any thoughts? So we got people who were there that day, people who were on the other side of the country that day, and people who were overseas that day. What kind of a variable is that? That is a variable, right? It's kind of where were you on that day? Is that a continuous variable or a categorical variable? It's a categorical variable. So we have one variable that's categorical, maybe where were you, or locate, maybe we could call it location. So one variable called location. How many levels? How many levels for that? Beverly, how many levels?
3.
There are 3 levels, exactly. And how about the dependent variable? What am I measuring here?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Continuous, right? So the question now is, what kind of analysis would be appropriate here? What would be the right kind of analysis here? You got one independent variable, 3 levels, and you got a dependent variable that's anxiety, kind of continuous. That be a correlation? What would we do on that? Beverly, any thought about that?
We wouldn't do a correlation because they're not both
Yeah, they're not continuous.
variables.
So it can't be a correlation. Could we do t-tests? Could we do t-tests? You could, but there'd have to be a few of them. The appropriate analysis here would be a one-factor ANOVA. This would be a one-factor ANOVA. This would be, you all right, bud? So, you all right, Emily? Are you okay? No? We'll take a break, Sue. Or if you just want to go with the recordings and take a break, that's fine. You can just kind of listen and don't type, okay? So this would be a one-factor ANOVA because we have one independent variable, location of where you were that day, 3 levels, and then you have 1 dV. So it's going to be a one-factor ANOVA. So let's go and do our analysis. And Emily, I'm thinking this might be good for you to even just click the buttons if you can. Copy and paste it. So let's go and do the analysis. So we would go into what?
Compare means.
Compare means. There you go. One-way ANOVA. What's the dependent variable? It's the anxiety level, right? Go at the bottom. And what's the factor? September 11th. And then also click it on post hoc. Click it on post hoc and do a Tukey's. And continue. And do options. Options. And descriptives. And do OK.
Do I need to put all that in my notes that we just did?
Probably the steps.
Okay.
But you could do that. You can listen in. And so let's copy these 2 things. Copy the anxiety table. And then copy the ANOVA. That's good. And we'll hold off on. And actually the multiple comparisons as well. And just save that. So much for a 45-minute class. If I was alone on my bike, I would have been done in 20 minutes. You didn't know that story about Bill, did you? He was really angry at me. Actually, the other story is we were once biking through a place called Patterson, New Jersey, and I should have known better than to bike through that area. It was a very crime-ridden city, and some people came out of their houses, and it looked like they were kind of after us, and so I started speeding up, and Bill couldn't do that, and so he was very angry at me later.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so much for personal stories here. Okay, so let's, you can just hang out if you want, Em. Let's write some notes about these situations. So the top screen, the descriptives. What does the descriptives tell you? What do we see on the descriptives? If you were actually in New York City that day, and you're measuring what anxiety, higher number means more anxiety, how does your anxiety look if it's a 10-point scale? Your anxiety looks very high. Holy cow, a 9. How about if you were on the other side of the country or in another country? How does your anxiety look? Pretty low, and not really very different than each other. So do you think the ANOVA will be significant? Yes. Let's go down to the ANOVA screen. Is the ANOVA significant? It is. You could write out what, an F of 2. What would it be? F2, comma. What would it be? F of 2 and?
12.
12 equals 144. P less than 001. Just rest him. So it's statistically significant. What does the multiple comparison chart tell you? It did a Tukey's post hoc test. What does that tell you? Are all the groups different? Are all the groups different than each other?
No.
No.
Which groups are different?
1 and 2 and 1 and 3.
Yeah, it looks like the group that, if you were there that day, you're much higher anxiety than the other two groups. So the post hoc test confirms that. So you can say you did a Tukey's post hoc test, and it confirms this idea. You can add some comments to that. But that's the third analysis. So what I would like you to do with this one is you can even go back and look in your notes when we did the one-factor ANOVA on the eyewitness memory one. Just write all the steps in that you would do for this, and then write statistical and real-world conclusions. Are you guys good on that one? You saving this in? Okay, we got one more to do. We're cruising.
And that was the notes from the eyewitness.
Yeah,
do you
it
remember what
was.
date that was?
It was like right after.
Was it 27?
Yeah, it was right after the test, I think.
On the 22nd.
Okay, I'll stop this.